Say hi, everybody. Hi. Love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Also, before anything else, just want to take a moment to recognize Nick and the South by Southwest team that worked so hard to make this event possible, not just during the week and a half of programming, but year-round. So if we could just hand for Nick and the team. All right. First of all, thank you all for being here. Welcome to our featured session, all you need to know about the music business right now. With me to my left is a man that needs no introduction. His work as an author in the industry is legendary, but also an attorney in Los Angeles at Gang, Tire, and Rammer. Please welcome Texas' own Don Passman. And I am David DiCristofaro. I am a fan experience expert and curator of interactive, immersive, and creative tech experiences for music's top artists and design direct-to-fan initiatives. My most recent project was a year-long augmented reality activation for a small up-and-coming act out of Ireland named U2 at an indie venue in Los Angeles called The Sphere. We're hoping they make it. We're pulling for them. For the past 25 years, we've seen a series of shifts away from traditional models, distribution, revenue label, upon which the music business was previously built around and flowed in and out of and through. We've since experienced the rise of streaming platforms and tech companies driving that industry, as well as a shift to models and live performance ecosystems. And so we want to open this conversation up in a moment. Please do remember to submit your questions on the app, as we're looking forward to a Q&A with you. And also just want to point out, Donna is doing a book signing as well on the third floor in the bookstore in 10C at 2:45 p.m. So with everything that's been going on, to put it lightly, during that time, in what ways has streaming changed the music business from your perspective?
Well, streaming is the most radical change in the music business since it was started in the beginning. Starting back in the beginning of the music business, music was always monetized by selling something. It was a sheet music, it was a piano roll, it was a wax cylinder, obviously later vinyl and CDs. The whole system was based on how many sales do I get, and the artist was paid and the record companies were paid based on how many sales they get. The change over now has nothing to do with sales. It has to do, I mean, sales are still part of the business, vinyl in particular, but most of the business is streaming, and streaming works completely differently. The way that streaming works is that the subscribers or advertisers pay a pot of money. That money goes into a pool. At the end of the month, they look at how much is in the pool. Then they go back and look at how many streams there were and who had how many. So if I have 10% of the streams, I'm going to get 10% of the money, right? Well, that doesn't sound as radical as in fact it is. And the reason it's radical is the following. In the days of physical sales, it doesn't matter once somebody buys my album, whether they play it once, 1,000 times, or never play it, okay? In streaming, it only matters how many times it gets played. And why is that important? Well, I can go to the record store and I can buy multiple CDs at the same time, or multiple vinyl at the same time, but I can only listen to one thing at a time. So every time that I listen to my record, somebody is not listening to your record, okay? So, and again, that is even more deep, because when you get into that, remember, it used to be there was no cap on how many records I could sell. If I have, millions of fans buying my records, it has nothing to do with how many people are going to buy your record. If anything, having a lot of sales is going to bring people into stores, and they're more likely to buy my record if you've got a big hit, because they're already there. In streaming, that's not true. In streaming, again, it's only one thing at a time. Now, the other thing is that when I'm selling physical, there's no cap on how many I can sell. It's just the number of fans and people that want it. But when we're streaming, if you think back to what I said a minute ago, there's only so much money every month. It's advertising and it's subscribers. That's it, nothing else. So the fight becomes, how does that get allocated? And now for the first time, my sales do affect your sales, sales in quotes. My listens affect your listens. We're all fighting for part of the same pool. It's what's called a zero-sum game. It means that there's only so much to go around, and then how much of it am I going to get? So that's changed the whole dynamic of the music business in terms of how do you market to people? What do record companies do in this new age? We'll get into all this because I know you have some follow-up questions, but it is a much more radical change than it seems like to move from a physical world to streaming.
And for context, I mean, I'm sure many of you know the history here, but just a snippet, for that context. You think back to the end of we're going to say 1900s, we're going to go there, and beginning of the 2000s, peer-to-peer file sharing, Napster, and the disruption that took place, and all the shifts in the industry, business models, things like that since then. You're talking about a record industry that pretty much from the 70s forward was reformatting the ways that we played, listened to music, right? And we're reissuing famous records 4 or 5 times over across vinyl, CD, MP3, 8-tracks, cassette tapes, and reissuing and reselling these albums multiple times and multiplying the revenues, right? So you think about the disruption that digital caused, the way that it took that floor right out from underneath them. You can imagine the size of that type of Richter-like shift and ripple effect that it's had over time, which brings us current, where in recent years we're seeing an indie label boom. We're seeing major artists from Pink Floyd to Justin Bieber selling their publishing rights and catalogs, which is a significant shift from that recording industry era where artists would at times battle their labels, right, over ownership and control of their master recordings. How has the role of labels changed in the streaming era, Don? And how have those changes led to the creation of democracy in recorded music?
Yeah. Well, the democracy is that if you go to something like TuneCore, you can have your music on every streaming service within a couple of hours, and it doesn't cost you very much. It's less than $100 a year, or less than $100 maybe altogether. I don't remember. But the point is that everybody can get their music up. So it used to be in the physical days, it was really difficult to get your music distributed. You had to manufacture, you had to ship, you had to warehouse, you had to actually jockey for position. How do I get in make sure the stores will actually take me? How do I make sure the stores will pay me? These were all things that were large barriers to entry. Also, in those days, if you didn't get on radio, it was really hard to have a hit. And the labels had clout and could get people onto radio. Well, that's not true anymore. First of all, radio is becoming less and less meaningful. Streaming and is becoming much more meaningful. Secondly, anybody can get their music up now. That's the good news. The bad news, anybody can get their music up. There are, anybody want to take a guess how many new tracks are uploaded every single day? Anybody want to take a guess? 20,000? 200? 120,000. You're all right in the range. It's over 100,000 a day. 100,000 new tracks every day. Mm-hmm. Think of how much stuff is out there. So how do you break through the noise? How do you do it? Well, the labels, in theory, are marketing companies that have clout, knowledge, expertise, data, and can help get you through the system. In reality, the artists are doing it themselves. The way that you get started now as an artist is you have to build your own buzz. Because interestingly, the labels have sort of shifted from becoming people that would go out to clubs and find some unknown artist that they thought they could groom, into looking online and seeing who's trending and who's starting to get traction and then going after them, which makes for a really interesting change in dynamics. First of all, it means the artists that do it have more clout. And all you need to know about the music business, I have a chapter on ways to do this. It's not the thrust of my book. There's other books that are probably much better at it in terms of the do-it-yourself. But they have to build a buzz. They have to build a fan base. They have to build a database of their fans. They can get a lot of data themselves. They can tell from streaming where the records are streaming. So they know not to go to Cleveland if nobody knows about them, and while in Iowa they're killing it. And so artists have a lot more data available to them than they ever could before. So the idea is they've got to build a buzz themselves, and then if they want to have a record label, which is a big question these days, maybe you need one, maybe you don't, then they've got the companies chasing them. On the other side, if you do want a record deal, artists have never had more clout at any time in history. The reason is that all the companies have the same data. So when they see someone trending, they all chase them, and they all bid against each other. And artists today are getting things they could have never dreamed of in the past. They'll get ownership of their masters, their recordings. Never happened. I mean, interesting, it happened back in the 60s and 70s, not in the 60s, in the 70s. Then the companies decided those were their assets, and it wouldn't. They're getting 50% of the record company's profits. Also never happened in the past for a new artist. These things always existed for superstars, but now brand new artists are getting these kinds of deals. So it's very much shifted the balance of power.
Yeah. So in that context, right, you think about that relationship between artists and labels, how things have changed, the approach that you mentioned. Present, like I said, you have kind of the rise of the indie labels at the moment. You have the majors that consolidated from 6 major labels back to 3 during the disruption in the early 2000s. How has that change in the ecosystem changed the approach toward record deals from both sides?
Well, you mean because there's indies as an alternative?
Yeah, just in general, from the artist side and from the label side, how would you say that the approach has changed toward record deals?
Well, I think artists are questioning whether they need deals more than before. If you're a niche artist with a limited fan base that's never going to be gigantic, you're going to make more doing it yourself as long as you can reach your fans, because you'll keep a bigger piece of the money. If you want to be a worldwide international superstar, virtually all of them have labels, although there will come a day when that will happen without one. But they usually, the artists will want the clout, the data, particularly in foreign territories where they need boots on the ground and they need people marketing and working it and so forth. They'll want to have a label behind them. And the indie labels, make the pitch that, you're going to be a big fish in our pond. We're going to give you more care and attention than a major label will. And a lot of times that's true. Ultimately, like in any other phase of life, this comes down to finding someone who's passionate about your music and being a champion. If that person's with a major label, great. If that person's with an indie label, great. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's something we have to evaluate depending on who the artist is and what their dreams and desires are.
Speaking of the present state of the business, it's been an interesting time for AI in music, to say the least, at least last couple of years. We went from a fan-created and released Drake song with The Weeknd, made with AI, to Drake using AI a year ago to make and release his own music with an AI Tupac, to the Beatles winning a Grammy for a song that they used AI in the mix to complete the demos of vocals by John Lennon. And so I was interested to ask Don, what stands out to you most, pro and cons, surrounding AI in music?
Well, AI is a really interesting topic, mostly because it's brand new and because it's shiny and interesting. Let me talk for a second about legalities around AI, because they're pretty interesting. And then I'll go back to what I think the practical uses are and where I think they fit into the business. There are 3 copyright issues around AI. For anyone who doesn't know, a copyright is a legal right. For example, if I write a song and I have a copyright in my song, I do just by putting it in tangible form. Once I have the copyright, I can stop other people from using it. If somebody rips it off, I can sue them, I can get money. And so a copyright's an important aspect of the music business all the way around. The whole business is built on it, both the the songwriting business and the recording business have copyrights. So it's essential to enforcing rights. And in AI, there are a number of copyright issues. The first one being that you cannot get a copyright on something that's created by AI. The laws are, there's some argument about it, and there's some people claiming you should be able to, but in fact today you can't. Anything that AI creates means that anybody can use it, and that they're free to use it and don't have to pay anybody for it. If you think about should there be a copyright in AI? Well, maybe, but who owns the copyright? Is it the guy who created the program that does the AI? Is it the person who puts input into the program and says, you know, make me some spa music? That's probably not copyrightable. Maybe if there's enough originality to it, it would be. If you said, you know, do a picture of an airplane flying upside down with a kangaroo shooting lightning out of his eyes, I'm not sure anybody wanted it, but maybe it's copyrightable, maybe. But it's only the part that's human that's copyrightable. The idea that you put something in that's unique and you have a copyright in, you don't get a copyright in what comes out of it, only in what goes into it. So start with the premise that there's no copyright in it. Then the next question is, what about the output? What if the output sounds a lot like somebody else's song? Is that an infringement? Can the other person sue the AI, in quotes? Well, there's nobody to sue because who's the AI author? But the people distributing it are also responsible for the copyright infringement. So if a record company puts out something that's created by AI but sounds like somebody else, they can get sued and they can have to pay for it. So the issue then becomes what is AI good for and what's it going to mean? The other thing that's interesting about this is that if you're following what I'm saying so far, there's no copyright. So how, if I'm Drake and somebody puts up a fake song of me, how do I stop it? Well, it's not so easy to stop, it turns out. There's no copyright. I don't have a copyright in my voice, so to speak. I may have it in a specific recording, but not my voice. In fact, a lot of the argument now is about the materials used for training AI. Because the AI generators are going out and training on everything that's available that they can get their hands on, and a lot of that's copyrighted. And there's cases ongoing right now about whether or not that's okay. Obviously, the people that own the intellectual property don't think so. They either want permission or they want to be paid for it. And so putting that aside for the moment and assuming they get past that, although that's no small putting aside, the question then becomes how would you stop it? And you can't do it under copyright law because the AI has no copyright. So how you do it under the laws that are like fair labeling. For example, if you're selling a cereal that tastes like grape nuts, you can't call it grape nuts. You can call it something else. You call it grape nuts, it's not from General Mills. General Mills can sue you and stop you from doing it. So they use that theory. It's called unfair competition, passing off unfair use of somebody's name and likeness in doing it. But that's not a federal law. That's a state law. And it goes state by state. And it's different state by state. And they're not consistent. And so it's very messy to do it. As a practical matter, right now, anything that's AI that the companies don't want, they have relationships with Spotify and the other digital service providers to get it taken down if it starts to get any kind of traction. Because the other issue is, remember, go back to what I said in the beginning about how the money gets allocated every month. There's a certain amount and it gets split up. Well, if you flood the market with a lot of AI where there's no copyright owner and they're getting a piece of the money allocated to them, they're taking away from the people who are the real artists and the real creators. And that could become a serious issue. The companies are handling it or trying to handle it contractually in their deals with Spotify, Apple Music, and the services, and making sure they can't do that with AI and they can't allocate to it. But it's very much an ongoing area, and it's going to be fascinating how it shakes out over the next few years.
Well, I'm not sure what genre that would be, by the way, with the kangaroo with the lightning. It may be a lightning kangaroo core. By the way, just curious, show of hands, I always like to know, who we're talking to. How many people in the room are students? Oh, you guys are awesome. Thank you for sitting near the front and the middle. I love you guys. How many of you are in education? Did you see the numbers differential there? There should be a lot more people in education in here, but that's okay. We forgive them. They can always go back and watch. But something I do want to point out and draw attention to, what Don just shared has a lot of implications to AI, but just something to keep in mind, because this is kind of, coming around the corner. AI is in the spotlight, rightfully so right now. I probably will be for, a while in the foreseeable future. Right around the corner, we have quantum computing. Right around the corner, metaverse, virtual spaces. We're kind of on a little bit of a break from those post-pandemic, because we spent a lot of time in those spaces during that time. Everybody wanted to get back to live. But those things do have utility supplementally during the year when the artist isn't on the road. There's a lot of practical applications that I believe you're going to see rise. And as we start to think about metaverse, it is like the Wild West when it comes to legal, in the sense that a lot of it's not defined and was not dreamed of when many of the laws were passed back in the day in terms of IP and intellectual property. So just wanted to kind of point that out. I was interested to ask you, Don, looking back over the last year or two, were there any AI cases in the headlines that caught your eye in particular?
Well, the ones that are most important are the ones around training. Getty Images has sued some of the AI companies, and then it's been followed up by the labels are suing Sono and one other I can't remember the name of for their thing, which creates music when you put in prompts, saying it was trained on their material, and so those are the most important key cases that are going on at the moment. By the way, I didn't say the one thing I thought AI could be useful for, which is as a tool, in the same way that Pro Tools is a tool, in the same way that programming an instrument is a tool. I think AI can be really useful in terms of an artist making a creation, but I still think that things created by AI by themselves, at least today, aren't necessarily as compelling and legally very, very complicated.
I have a lot of older legacy acts I love, like the Beatles, but also the ones that I grew up on that I love, like Green Day and the Foo Fighters and Nirvana. And so one of the things I notice sometimes with career trajectory is that some of the songs that maybe have a little bit of an edge or a tempo that I loved from early on in their career, their songwriting style changes over time, where then the songs and music that they're making, the records that they're making, may not hit the same way with their fan base. And I can't help but wonder how cool would it be to be able to use an AI tool to help, kind of familiarize itself with your writing style and help you write a song sort of in the vein or in the style, right, that first captured the hearts of your fans to begin with. Little help like that can go a long way sometimes with an artist, with their fan base long term. So just something that kind of came to mind. But looking ahead, now we get to do one of my favorite parts, which is forecasting a little bit. And just kind of talking about what might be coming down the pipeline in the future, just over the horizon. And so I was interested to ask what developments or trends or you see emerging, or things that people could keep an eye out for.
Yeah, what I think's coming, I don't see in the near future a radical change like we did when we went to streaming. What I do see is streaming maturing and saturating. And when that happens, it happened in Scandinavia because Spotify started there, it happened years ago, the income goes flat because you've got the maximum number of subscribers you're going to get. And so there's no more money. The only way to make more money is to raise the prices on it. And the companies are starting to see that. The industry is starting to mature. We're starting to saturate as many subscribers as we're going to get. And so they're looking at, the obvious thing is raise your prices, but the other thing is they're looking at different fan experiences. You can get a super fan experience for a little bit more money, and you get early access to tickets, or you get a poster, or you get a special early listen to the track. They're experimenting with things like this as another way to money on the recorded music side. I think touring is going to continue to be great because you can't pirate a live experience in the way that you did before. There was a burst of touring after COVID with pent-up demand when everybody was on the road and concerts were going out left and right. That's now cooled off. The superstars are doing fine. The middle class, not so much, and because it's expensive. And so I think there'll be some interesting things around that. But I think those are the things I see on the near horizon.
Just to share a couple for my part. Mine would probably be data sharing in performance agreement contracts and the rise of creative revenue models and live performance and venue ecosystems. And also on the topic of revenue, it'll be interesting to see with globalization if some countries unite to adapt a shared royalty payment structure or option, kind of like the euro for music. That'd be interesting, right? Also with revenue models shifting over the last 20 plus years, from being built around the record sales to being built around tickets and experiences, core superfan initiatives, what new engagement will be added to real life and digital in those ecosystems and environments, and also whether or not the reporting of songs performed in the live space and the royalties collected and distributed from them will perhaps come under a fresh new evaluation for what that could look like in the future, with the emphasis and the revenues being driven so much by live moving forward. And so we're really excited to open it up to take some questions, and we know we got that set up on the app. Before we do, just once more, Don is doing a book signing at 2:45 p.m., third floor, 10C bookstore. We'd love to see you there. I'll be here all week. Don't forget to tip your waitress, and be happy to talk to you as well. But let's take a look at the app and see what questions we've got queued up for us. How's everybody doing? Are y'all having a fun South by? You getting free tacos? Oh, the students don't know. You gotta do a little digging through the schedule, but that one was for the students. That was some competitive insights right there, some industry insights for our student community. All right, here we go. So. Artist-owned fan data, this is from Fons Alvera, should be an important priority for artists. But do artists really understand why?
Well, I think artists are understanding it more and more. And it's a good question, Fons. Owning the data is becoming much more of an issue now because for the most part, artists don't own their data. It's owned by one of the services that they're on or the record label if they have a record label. And artists are figuring out that it's really important to own your data. Data meaning the ability to access your fans. They're your fans, and the more access you have to them, the more you can deal with them directly. You can offer them merchandise, you can offer them tickets, you can offer them things that help create and deepen the relationship. And for the same reason, the people that own the data are trying to hang on to it because it's a valuable asset on their part. So there will be push and pull on this in the future.
This one's from Christopher Bush. Do you think we're in a bubble with respect to the frenzy surrounding catalog acquisitions?
Good question. Yes, I think the bubble's already starting to shrink. The recent line of catalog acquisitions came from really one company called Hypnosis. And the guy who was running it decided to go out and pay way more than anyone has ever paid in history for catalogs, multiples of the income on the catalog. Just to give you an example, historically for a classic catalog of songs, not recordings, but recordings are cheaper, but songs, maybe you would get 15 to 20 times the earnings, and he was starting to pay in the high 20s, even early 30s. Low 30s for the times the earnings. So he was way above market, and then people who never thought about selling in the past suddenly go, this is a lot of money, and I may be able to get a favorable capital gains tax treatment, and maybe I should do this. I've done sales, but I mostly try to talk my clients out of them. And the reason I do that is because historically, everyone who has sold their songs has regretted it. The Beatles were sold to Michael Jackson for $47 million, it's probably worth $1 billion today. Yes, you get a lot of money up front, but I say, and then I put them through an exercise. Okay, how much money are you going to get? These are the expenses you're going to pay in selling, which are not insubstantial. You're going to have X left. Then you're going to pay tax on that, and they're going to have Y left. Put Y. What are you going to do with Y? How are you going to invest it? And when you get through investing it, are you going to make as much money as you're making now on your catalog? And also, the reasons I tell clients to sell, the ones that have done it, tend to be older people. They don't have kids or heirs that either have the expertise or the desire to work with their catalog, or that will kill each other trying to work with the catalog. And some of them need money to pay their estate tax, because the catalogs get valued when they die, and if it's worth $50 million, they're going to be owing the government, $30 million in taxes, or $20 million in taxes, sorry. And so they don't have $20 million lying around. So there may be reasons to do it with older artists. Younger artists, for the most part, I've talked out of. Not all of them, but most of them. Obviously, if someone wants to do it, know how to do it. I just want them to make sure they have their eyes open and that they're doing it for the right reasons.
Thoughts on implications of deals between companies such as UMG and Meta, and what it might mean for artists, and artists who have previously used social media to promote. That's from Ethan Moore. So what are the implications on deals between companies such as UMG, who's made a lot of headlines, if you've been paying attention, the last couple months, right? Moving away from some of the deals and partnerships that they had with other agencies and platforms.
Well, the companies always want to make deals with the platforms. The question is whether or not the platforms will make a deal they consider fair. There was that huge fight between Universal Music Group and TikTok, because TikTok uses a lot of music and doesn't pay anywhere near what the labels and the creative community think they should be paying. They, of course, have a very different view of it. And so but it's also a mutually assured destruction. I mean, these platforms can't get by without music. And so they have to come to some sort of an agreement with it. There get to be a lot of politics around it. In the TikTok era, the artists look at this as promotion and aren't as interested in the dollars. I mean, they like money, of course, but that's not the main driver. The main driver is to reach their fans and to enhance their career overall in terms of touring and merchandise and fan visibility. And so they put pressure on the company as well from the other side, saying, I've got an album coming out. I don't want to not be on TikTok, or to use that just as an example. So they have to make these deals, but it's a very careful dance.
So a question from Corey Zeckman. What's the best streaming payout model for musicians and in the future of the industry? Do you have a dog in that fight or an opinion on that?
In terms of the deals between the streamers and the record labels, is that?
Yep.
Yeah. Sure. Again, mutually assured destruction. The record companies can't make a deal that doesn't let the streamers survive. The streamers have to have music or they have no business. Interestingly, Spotify is the only pure play in terms of music. That's their only business. They're trying to diversify a bit, but that's mostly it. Whereas if you look at Apple, obviously this is a pimple on their balance sheet. Same thing with YouTube. It's a pimple on their balance sheet in terms of the kind of revenue and the other businesses that they're in. Same thing with Amazon. But Spotify is the pure music play. The percentages have, originally they started out and paying around 70% to content. It's come down. It's now in the 60s. The companies, the streamers said they can't survive at that, but it's somewhere in the 60s. That includes both the record companies and the songwriters. And then that money gets paid to the publishers, the record companies. Publishers are the people that take care of the songs as opposed to the recordings, and they pay the creative people.
So a question from Meredith. What is your opinion on Taylor Swift re-recording her songs, which, if you know your music history, Kiss did first back in the day? It's a deep cut for you guys.
Yeah, I think it was a great move on her part. It has never worked as well as it did with Taylor in history. People that re-recorded, for the most part, didn't make it didn't. Those songs didn't do very well because people wanted the original. But nobody has a megaphone like Taylor, and so when she did it, it was pretty extraordinary. The result, of course, is that record deals today will prohibit artists from doing that. They won't let you go out and duplicate your catalog down the road in the future.
Matt Zenner asks, what is the long-term impact for songwriters of BMI going for profit? Will their writers do better or worse than those with ASCAP or another PRO?
Very good question. Let me just explain what it means for those of you who are not familiar. A PRO is an organization that collects money when your song is played publicly. That means radio, television, nightclubs, theme parks, ballparks. Anytime your song's played publicly, something called a PRO, meaning Performance Right Organization, collects the money, puts it into a pot, and then allocates it to the writers and publishers that they represent. ASCAP there's two major ones in the US, ASCAP and BMI. They do the same thing, they just represent different writers. ASCAP has always been a nonprofit, and BMI has always been for profit. BMI was organized by the broadcasters, but historically, BMI never took a profit. They just gave all the money back to the writers, same as ASCAP, after their overhead. What happened is that BMI was acquired not long ago by a venture capital firm called New Mountain. They, of course, are in the business of making a profit. So they raised their rates in what they were taking in overhead in order to do that. There was a lot of flap from the publishing community, a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiating, and then suddenly the publishers were happy with the deals that they made. And in reality, their percentage is not terribly far out of line than it is with other performing rights organizations, particularly around the world, where some of them charge a lot more. So they probably do make a bit less with BMI, but it depends on the song. Some songs will do better with ASCAP, some will do better with BMI. It depends on a lot of different factors, including their deals with the broadcasters and the people that are using the music. So it's not a simple answer, but it seems to be going on, and everybody seems to have taken it in stride and moved along.
Tom Falens asks, with the dissemination of music IP, samples, and stems, the unbundling of recording assets, as I call it, is there a platform you have seen rising to become a source of truth of rights?
Good question. So stems are the individual tracks and parts of a song that are broken down, and then before they're mixed together to make the song that you hear. And when they're broken down, people will take them and make new things out of them, or mix and match, or manipulate them in some fashion. The question, I gather, is there going to be a place where you can go do that centrally? I think the answer is no. And the reason is pretty simple. If I'm an artist, I actually care about what you do with my tracks and my stems. And I don't want to just, some artists don't care. Some artists are very much about my art's for everybody, help yourself. But most want to, because of their own image and their own branding, want to control what comes out of it. So to a large degree, I don't think there's going to be a central place that exists, because I think it's too individual and each artist may actually care.
Kevin Parmley asks, what is your take on the recently released Album of Silence by 1,000 artists in the UK? Wolfpack's silent album, those concepts. Do you think it will have any positive effect, or that the message that they're trying to send will cut through?
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's a novelty and it's a gimmick. I don't see a lot of silent albums coming out in response. But I think that, there's a lot of issues going on right now, and it's a clever way to call attention to it, because now we're all talking about it.
Let's see. There's some really good ones here. You guys did really good on the questions, so we'll popcorn some of these at the end that I can hopefully help answer for you. I just want to make sure we prioritize some ones here for Don. Let's see. In the age of TikTok, Amanda Lahaff asks, and quick hit singles, what do you think the next big revenue driver of the music industry is going to be?
I don't. Well, I still think the quick hits and the individual songs are going to be a major revenue driver. The other things are what I think I talked about earlier, which is creating a super fan experience. I think that's something that people want. And maybe a small percentage of people really want to go for the super fan part, but I think there's enough of them spread across the artists to make a difference. And I think everybody will do better in that world.
Adi Har Shemesh asks, what is the most stable field and position in the music industry currently, if there is any? I think we could both probably maybe make some suggestions.
Lawyers.
I had a feeling he was going to open with that. Did you see me set Don up for that one? Very true, though. I mean, the man speaks the truth.
If you're talking, I mean, it's apart from the joke part of it. By the way, we are there no matter what. So are the business managers, people who keep track of money for the artists. There's always going to be touring. When you say stable, if you mean job stability because a company is going to keep you forever, that's up to you and the kind of work you do. And also, if you're working for a company that could get sold, it may not be up to you, even if you're excellent. So. I don't know that there's anything you would call stable, other than people like lawyers and business managers and who are fairly independent, personal managers as well, although they're subject to the whims of clients, as we all are. But I think that in terms of in general, it's stable as most industries.
And my advice on that is to look over the timeline of the music and multimedia verticals, right? Focus on things that are evergreen, things that existed then, exist now, and will exist in the future. Similarly, if you are working for companies or brands, there's departments and verticals within them that are transferable and represented in each one of them. And gaining experience in one of those then makes it transferable for, industry shifts, the way that life changes, things along those lines. And so that's a tip as well that might come in handy as you're navigating that. I have a couple more here and then probably popcorn some. Laura Del Rio wants to know, what would you have said to your younger version of a lawyer in the music business?
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think I would have said, be more patient than I was. I was when I was young, I was anxious to move as quickly as I could, and it turns out my path was more tortoise than hare. And very frustrating to watch people my age, shoot past me when I was younger. But I was always just a slow, steady build. And I think I would have just told myself to be patient, hang in there. It's going to take time, and build a solid foundation, and it'll last longer.
Now, we have a handful of these that are in the live space that I'm going to try and popcorn for you real quick. And, of course, with Don free to add with anything that he sees in that space as well. Cal Marconi asks, with artists having more power, how is that changing the way that concerts are negotiated? Are artists choosing to self-produce their tours instead of selling shows? And then Helene Leperson asks, do you think live experiences and festivals can make a difference in artist discovery, artist marketing versus digital tools to grow audience on platforms? And one more, because this is going to be kind of a combine answer for you guys, okay? Erland Grinna asks, what trends are emerging on the promoter part, the value chain in terms of booking? Any new players challenging the current state of venues doing it themselves? Here's what I would say, right? If you look back over at how artists do what they do, they have great teams around them of great people who do what they do great, for lack of a better term. And those people form their teams, and they help set these things up, right? Their deals, negotiate their agreements. What I'm excited about, when we saw some models like this introduced into ticketing, we saw it introduced into booking coming out of the pandemic, but because it didn't have major promoters scaling it, it kind of got not completely forgotten, but it hasn't really been tapped into yet. Is that realistically, if you're in that top tier of music where you're touring NFL stadiums, you could realistically experiment with some pretty innovative approaches towards ticketing and booking, just to kill two birds with one stone, right? If I'm the Rolling Stones, I could do, and somebody made this point about Oasis, by the way, you could do your own on sale without even booking the venues, as crazy as that might sound, up front. You could let your demand determine the size of the shows and then shop that to venues and make it competitive. Tickets, somebody else also asked about ticketing. The problem with ticketing isn't that we've seen like the ceiling of prices. The problem with ticketing, generally speaking, on the fan side versus the artist, is that what we're seeing is what fans realistically will pay to get a ticket to, be close to and experience their artist. And there's this dynamic tension that exists right now, between what does that look like and is it ethical, right? On one hand, we don't know what tomorrow holds for any of us, right? And so for the artist, they might have a window, albeit short or long, that they could sell a ticket, then allow the market to determine the value of that ticket and what it could sell for, right? And we say we support our artists. So on one hand, you have that opportunity for them to do that. On the other hand, you have the fans who see that and say, well, that's an awful lot more money than I can afford for a ticket. You even hear artists say that often their most passionate fans are up in the balcony or in the back. I think it was Billy Joel goes and has his team pick people out of the audience and save some seats for them up front to bring up front based on their passion level. So, it's something that does need to be approached creatively, and we need to be willing to try some things that aren't just the same old, right? Without naming names, coming out of the pandemic, I heard people from major promoter companies saying, we're going to get back to, muscle memory, right? We had a couple of years to really put things under the microscope, and, well, maybe we shouldn't. Not saying we need to scrap the structure, but it might be worth a good look.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot of expense in promoting a tour, and most of the major artists these days are going with the larger promoters, Live Nation or AEG, because they have the infrastructure, and particularly in the beginning, they may be willing to make a bet on you and help you with your marketing and put you in venues you might not otherwise get into. And then at the higher levels, of course, you're going to make a much tighter deal with them. And you'll end up making more money than you might on your own. They have favorable deals with the venues you can sometimes take advantage of. So there's reasons to do it. But, again, it's everybody figures out their own situation. There's an overseas client that I have worked with that takes a big chunk of their tickets and then sells it themselves through their fan site and verified fans, and make sure that their fans are the ones actually getting the ticket. But what David said earlier is absolutely true. The true value of the ticket is on places like StubHub and SeatGeek and Vivid Seats, who are annoying to a lot of the industry because they take no risk. They don't put up any money for the show. All they are doing is facilitating a transfer on shows that are popular, and if the show's a stiff, they have no skin in the game. They're not even like scalpers that buy the tickets early and get stuck with them. So it's that is the true value, but a lot of artists don't want to be perceived as charging that much money for their tickets. So it's an interesting area, and I do think we'll see some change over the next few years.
I'd love to see some creative models that scale based on how much tickets are selling, where, the more that the tickets sell towards the back of the venue, the lower the price gets for everybody. Like the models like that, and I think that's what I mean about creativity and innovation. That was Katie Stansel on that ticketing question, by the way. And have a couple more here. Let's see. Denny O'Dowd asks, with the flattening of streaming revenue, what are some examples of other direct-to-fan revenue streams that artists are exploring within the industry? And then Cal Marconi asks, do you think ticket sales are becoming more than just selling entry? How can artists and promoters use fan data from ticketing to create new revenue streams? Well, remember the bundles that they used to sell and still sell around pre-sales of records. That was adapted over, and that's where a lot of touring VIP programs come from. And so right now, that and merch are two of the biggest revenue drivers, along with tickets. But they're splitting the percentage of the sales on those tickets with the promoter based on their performing agreement. Live Nation recently announced they'll no longer take a cut of merch, which was kind of something that those of us that work in that space have known about for a long time, that is a percentage that the promoter takes a cut of. But that was news to most people, and including most music fans. For Live Nation, it was a competitive strategy because it wins favor with artists at every tier, right? Top tier, massive middle class, and then kind of that entry level, class that exists in music wins favor with them. At the same time, it puts independent promoters and venues in a competitive place, right? Because they rely more on percentage shares like that. So, there's economics in play that, again, I think requires some creativity and putting under the microscope. I think there's a lot of opportunities for microtransactions and micro revenues, gamified experiences and interactive experiences in the venue space that I think about almost every day that are doable right now and can be easily interfaced to those environments, that can create a supplemental revenue that will help offset some costs to scale, because you are dealing, most of the time with tens of thousands of people when you get into certain size amphitheaters up in terms of venue capacity. So when you think creatively that way, I actually think of eventually in time, not only will that be adapted, but it's going to change how we approach performance agreements, where, you saw that standoff between artists and promoters coming out of the pandemic come to a head where, with everything that happened, the promoters were wanting the artists to assume more of the risk and take less of a guarantee. Guarantees protected them in markets that tickets underperformed in, right? Ticket sales underperformed. Promoter wanted them to take less. Artists didn't want to give up that guarantee because, everything just shut down for 2 years, right? Things are unpredictable. So I think in time, that will actually create a saturated ecosystem that can support making a shift of allowing the artist to safely take on a little bit more of that risk, a little bit less of the guarantee, and make up those revenues through the ecosystem. That's my take on that.
Okay.
Let's see, how are we doing on time? We got 5 minutes. Okay. Let's see, I want to pick some good ones here. Emily Gruner, I got a question, an answer for you on this question real quick. In the age of augmented reality and virtual experiences, do you think there will be a continued interest in live events? What I just said, but think of it in terms of accenting the live performance space with augmented reality and windowed experiences around the venue, surrounding urban space, promotional cycle, leading into and post following the show, and then during the show, or during production windows. I hope that answers your question. It's really cool. There's examples of it if you want to look it up.
Let me comment on that. If the question is, will virtual reality replace live concerts? Not in today's world, I don't think. I think there is room for, how many people here have heard of ABBA Voyager? That's the hologram show in the UK, which is ABBA, who stopped performing in the 70s and never did a show since. ABBA doesn't mean much in the US. I mean, you probably know a few hits and maybe Mamma Mia, but they were like the Beatles in Europe and Australia and other places around the world. And this show is something that people go to. They dress up like ABBA, there's a pit, they're dancing, they're singing. It's quite an extraordinary experience. And there's a lot of those in the pipeline that'll be coming in the next few years. They're very expensive shows to put together, like hundreds of millions. But this ABBA show does, I think, 2,900 people, and they do 7 or 8 shows sold out every week, and it's been going for 2 years. It's done extraordinarily well, and it's once you get in and suspend reality, it's a pretty cool experience, and just because it's cleverly done. The whole theater is part of the experience. I mean, it's them on the stage, and they have large screens like you were in a stadium or a venue, and it's very cleverly done, and the tech's getting better and better and better. You can now have tech where the people on the screen are actually interactive with the audience, where somebody will yell, "I love you," and they'll say, "I love you too. What's your name?" So it's getting better and better, and I think we're going to see a lot of that. I don't think it's substitute for live experience, but I think it's going to be a very compelling product.
No substitute. Supplemental, yes, right? It can accent and enhance, but it's no replacement for the live experience. But what it can do, to Don's point, and this is something that I'm even doing, project proposal notes for older legacy acts right now whose clock is ticking on how long they're going to be able to perform live or tour. What it does do is it creates a path forward for them to sort of live on through digital expressions and forms of engagement for current but also future generations, so that they can experience them in ways that previously they wouldn't have been able to once they're no longer with us, right? So let's see, I think we got time for one more. Dun, dun, dun. Let's see. Yeah, this is a good one. Natalie Cuadrado. Could music streaming services stay competitive by curating exclusive content and backing select artists, similar to how TV and film platforms operate? I know they're starting to do that a little bit. They tried to kind of lean into podcasts, but yeah, I think they're starting to figure that out. For what it's worth, I think live cuts, right, and live recordings are kind of a huge untapped, potential area for those. But what do you think, Don?
Well, it's an interesting question, because if you think about it, Apple, Spotify, Amazon are all selling the same thing. There's no difference in the product, which is unlike Netflix, which has exclusive shows, or HBO Max, which has exclusive shows. And so it's interesting that it works that way. They've experimented a couple of times with artists saying you can only get it on this platform for a week, and all it did was drive piracy with the people who didn't want to pay for the platform. And so it didn't work, it went away. So I don't see them having different product in terms of the music itself. As David said, maybe there's a podcast, maybe there's some other kind of materials available that you don't get elsewhere. But for the most part, the artists want their music spread as widely as possible. They're not trying to limit their fans, and it upsets fans when they can't get things. So that's not a good fan-artist relationship.
And my thoughts on that are simply, and somebody did also have a question about the trajectory or relevancy of video, music video, right? I think this ties into this, is diversifying your content. I'd love to be able to watch music videos for certain artists if they're ranked highly or considered favorable while I'm discovering their song, when I'm listening to it on a streaming platform, and vice versa. I love the way that some visual streaming services are creating music experiences around the soundtracks to their programming, right? So I think there's a lot of untapped opportunity there. I will say this, I saw a 10-year trajectory on video, and it was substantial and considered to have, the most trajectory of content form, Anybody who grew up even just a little bit on MTV when they still played music videos knows the impact and relevancy that those could have. And if anything, we've seen that remain evergreen. We're seeing it on YouTube right now, right? That there's people who use YouTube as their primary form of streaming and music engagement and consumption. The only other thing I'll add to that is that if you look around, somebody also had a question about social media and how that's impacted fans. It has completely changed social behaviors for people that grew up on those platforms where they didn't know any differently, right? And one of the things that at least is a positive that I want to point to is that visual language. There's been this huge boost and rise in how we communicate visually too, through emojis, GIFs, memes, things like that, that you could argue is the most in history going back to hieroglyphics and cuneiform. So there's really interesting things taking place there right now that as streaming platforms are trying to figure out the socialization aspect, right, or the social aspect of how to engage and interact with people on their platforms. Just some tidbits that might be, interesting to kind of keep an eye on or keep an eye out for. But all that just to say, thank you, Don.
You're very welcome. And thank you, David. They said that there's not another event after this, so I'll come down outside if anybody has any questions after or just want to say hi and spend a few minutes. And thank you for asking me, David.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate you. Enjoy South by Southwest.